Ready, Justin? Hi, good morning, or good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'd just like to check. I have a somewhat quiet voice, I think. Well, welcome. Hope lunch was great. Hope you're not too full. Stay awake for the session. We have a great session on lowering costs and improving air quality. I'm Greg Butler. I'm with Local Government Academy. And myself and Jim Price, who I'm going to introduce in a second, worked together to get this session together as part of our combined efforts to promote sustainability within our region. So I guess questions during or after? What do you guys want to do?
Let's take them during.
Okay, questions during. And with that said, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then I'll step over to the side and we'll let these guys do their thing. First, we have Jim Price, who's the Sustainability Community Manager for Sustainable Pittsburgh, right here. Welcome, Jim. Keep you guys awake. We have Sarah Yeager with the Office of Resilience Planning Department, City of Pittsburgh. This is Sarah right here. And over on the end, we have Jason Dailey, the Public Works Director for Cranberry Township. So again, thanks for joining us, and I'm going to let Jim Price take over. It's all you, Jim.
All right, thank you, Greg. I'm with Sustainable Pittsburgh, and we work around the region, or actually around the state, with issues creating a more sustainable region, working to create a more sustainable region. Oh, you're getting it set there. So I'm going to go back one slide. The sustainable, if you've seen that logo around, you probably saw it upstairs. The Sustainable Pennsylvania Community Certification is a program for municipalities to go through to learn how they adhere to sustainability best practices, increase basically to become more economically efficient, to become more socially equitable, and to become more environmentally healthy and sound. So that's the idea behind it. It's really leveraging those three things to create better communities. As a part of that, oh, we got it right here. We have a Sustainable Pittsburgh works with all types of organizations. Sustainable Pittsburgh works with large businesses, small businesses, restaurants, universities, organizations of all types. I particularly work with municipalities across the state and local governments in collaboration with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, and then we do classes in collaboration with Local Government Academy. The main thing that we do here in Southwest Pennsylvania is the Sustainable Community Development Network, and that we have an e-newsletter, we have we have a number of classes. We just held an energy efficiency class that was well attended. 50-some people at Collier Township, where we rolled out a number of great initiatives and talked about a number of things. DEP was there and a number of other events. And then we have all these other performance programs for those other types of organizations. So we're here today to talk about fleet management and why fleet management is a big issue for sustainability. There's a number of reasons. It is economically something that can be a big help if you do it properly. It can lower costs, it can create efficiency, it can create better employee loyalty. If done properly, you're going to have happier employees, which is also something that you want to work for when you're talking about sustainability, because turnover is one of the most costly things that you can have in a municipality. It will increase efficiency because you will have less downtime with vehicles. And it'll improve air quality because newer models, when you're getting away from the older diesels, which are still really harmful to the environment, really harmful to air quality, and this region still suffers from when I say this, Allegheny County suffers from one of the worst air qualities in the entire country, still to this day, and 27% of carbon emissions and emissions come from vehicles. So it's still a big part of the problem. So anything you can do to improve that. The Mon Valley, for example, has 35% childhood asthma rates, which is 4 times the national average. So that's also a social equity issue. Some of the poorest areas suffer the most from air quality problems, and it's typically affecting the most vulnerable people. It's affecting people that don't have the ability to get a pick up and move. It's affecting children, and it's affecting elderly people. So air quality is a huge issue for this region. And then the other thing is that also, if you improve fleet management, you can lower emissions. And again, that's going to help with climate change and all the other issues that we're dealing with. And in this region, one of the biggest ways that we're going to be affected and are already seeing effects of climate change is increased water increased levels of water and stream levels. And that's a huge issue when you guys are all dealing with your MS4 permits and your water quality and those types of things. So lowering emissions is also a way to mitigate that problem as well. So that's why it's a sustainability issue. That's why it hits all those areas: social equity, environmental quality, and economic prosperity. So that's why we're really pushing it, and we want better fleet management and generally better municipal management in any way that we can help. So that's what we're here to help with. That's my contact information. If you ever need anything, please let me know. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Yeager, who's going to talk about the City of Pittsburgh's effort in fleet management and greenhouse gas inventory and their climate mitigation plan. So hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for being here today. As Jim mentioned, my name is Sarah Yeager. I'm the Resilience Analyst with the City of Pittsburgh. We're the Office of Resiliency within the Department of City Planning. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about some of our work around climate, specifically our greenhouse gas inventory, and then kind of how that plays into our fleet management and how we use that data moving forward. So a little, just very brief history of our office. We are the Office of Resiliency, so we've been around for about 4 years, and we started as a result of the City of Pittsburgh being awarded membership in the 100 Resilient Cities program. So through that, we look at an umbrella kind of approach, look at a broad range of topics, but then my kind of specialty or my area of focus within that is greenhouse gas inventories and kind of the climate piece. Just background, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with greenhouse gas inventories, but kind of the process behind it and what some of the benefits are of doing a greenhouse gas inventory. So we did our last inventory in 2015 using 2013 data. We're in the process of redoing one right now for 2017. But kind of the process is a lot of data collection. And I'll get into how this is kind of beneficial specifically around the fleet and transportation piece. But really the main part of a greenhouse gas inventory is the data. So how are we using energy? Where is our energy being used? What types of energy? And to collect this data, it requires strong partnerships, both internally across city departments, but then with our external partners as well. So one of the key pieces is utility partnerships. Through this process of kind of climate action, greenhouse gas inventories, we've really strengthened the partnerships between the utilities and the City of Pittsburgh as a whole. And so that really helps when we look at things, which I'll get into a little bit later, but things like converting our fleet to electric vehicles. The utilities are now helping us with that as far as planning out how we implement charging infrastructure and how we move some of those plans forward. But a lot of these relationships kind of started in the data collection and that initial phase. And I just listed a couple resources that we have found have been really helpful, and it's kind of partnerships of different cities, municipalities, both locally across the US, but then a lot of them are global as well, and they provide resources on how to go about doing a greenhouse gas inventory, and then also specifically with the Carbon Disclosure Project. I know the City of Pittsburgh uses that as one of our key performance indicators. We do an annual report to them, and we kind of are ranked or given feedback of how to improve and ranked among other cities around the world. I'll skip this one. So I mentioned that we, our last greenhouse gas inventory was using 2013 data. So this is just an overview, kind of where we are now, where we started in 2003, which is our baseline year. You can see in the breakdown, with the kind of circle graph is the breakdown of that 2013 data. And it is about 17% is transportation, which in the City of Pittsburgh is a little different than kind of the national average. As Jim mentioned earlier, it's closer to 27% nationally. But in the City of Pittsburgh, because of our large commercial buildings and our aging housing stock, our buildings use more energy, so therefore represent kind of a larger piece of that pie. But we still see transportation is 17% of our emissions, so it's still a large piece, and it's still something that we're really hoping to work on and improve. So I talked a little bit about the how of this greenhouse gas inventory process. But some of the reasons that we've worked to develop this, and we hope to do a greenhouse gas inventory yearly moving forward. So one of our big things is goal setting. The data collected in the greenhouse gas inventory helps us set our just general climate action goals, but then also we use that information departmentally to set goals within each department and try and really see what those that data can show us about what's happening within each department or within each sector of the city of Pittsburgh. Along with that, doing a yearly inventory or kind of repeating this greenhouse gas inventory process helps us to track that progress. Like I mentioned on one of the previous slides, there's a lot of peer-to-peer connection. We're part of a number of different programs that include cities around the US, but also around the world, and we can learn from them, compare data, but then also learn from them as far as how to improve that data and reduce those emissions. One other thing that we have really found to be helpful in this process is tracking where our emissions are occurring. So not only do we know that across the city of Pittsburgh we have about 4.7 million tons of CO2 emissions, we can actually pinpoint where those emissions are occurring. And so this is where things like air quality concerns and also areas of focus come into play, and kind of how we can focus our resources. As you can see, as we would kind of expect, if people are familiar with the city of Pittsburgh, the kind of bright red is the downtown area, which you can kind of expect. Downtown and Oakland are our two commercial centers. It's also where there's a lot of bus routes, and again, a lot of transportation occurring. So there's a lot of those transportation emissions as well as the building level energy use. I mentioned that one of our big reasons for doing the greenhouse gas inventory is the goal setting piece. So out of the 2013 inventory, we set the 2030 goals for the city of Pittsburgh, and these are broken into city of Pittsburgh goals kind of internally as looking at city operations as a business, and then externally as far as the whole 58 square miles of the city of Pittsburgh. So internally, we have goals of converting to 100% renewable electricity, divesting pension funds from fossil fuel companies, and then converting to an entirely fossil fuel free fleet. Then citywide, we have goals of zero waste, 50% transportation related emissions reduction, and 50% energy and water use reduction.
Question.
Yeah.
How are you getting these numbers? Do you have monitoring stations all over? How are you getting the CO numbers?
So a lot of that is, some of it is monitoring, a lot of it is actually looking at where energy is being used and then correlating that to emissions. So we know we have some capability to track buses, to track city fleet. We know where the heavily used corridors are as far as transportation emissions, and then with the buildings, we have zip code level data, so we know what energy use is per zip code, and then therefore kind of the related emissions in that area.
So I take it you monitor also the number of gallons of diesel and fuel pumped, comes up with a ratio or something?
For city fleet, yes. For kind of the larger just transportation within the city of Pittsburgh, it's a little bit more complicated. We use a lot of state level data modeled for the city of Pittsburgh, and then when we are able to, we do use actual real kind of location-based data, but it's a little bit more piecemealed because of security and privacy issues around private vehicles. But this is where, again, working across departments has really helped. So we have a better relationship through doing this greenhouse gas inventory, and also kind of a better data management with our fleet team, as well as some of like our environmental services, tracking our refuse vehicles, working with the Port Authority to track some of their buses and have real data around their gallons of gas used and that kind of stuff. So on the public sector side, we have a lot more real data. On the private side, it's a lot more modeled because of privacy concerns.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit more about fleet, but just kind of our overall goals of how we our strategies for how we get to these goals. A lot of it is the decarbonization of the electric grid, as well as decarbonization of transportation and of fleets, and then improving building operations, improving internal operations, changing how people get around. This is things like transit-oriented development, improving access to public transit, and reducing the need for a private or single occupancy vehicle. And then around the zero waste, just using less and figuring out ways to divert that waste from landfills. And then just generally a local focus. So how can we solve a lot of our problems in Pittsburgh with resources in Pittsburgh, whether it be the workforce, the institutions, a lot of our different partners, really that focus on local support and supporting the local community. So getting a little bit more into the fleet side, I talked a little bit about how we do that data collection, but then what do we do with that data? So the first piece is just getting the data and making sure that it's more accurate. Again, working across departments, working with our fleet management teams, working with our procurement teams, and ensuring that there is this idea of best practices or improved management of our fleet, as well as then that conversion to a fossil fuel-free fleet. So in the city of Pittsburgh, we have 5 new electric vehicles, and we have 10 that are ordered and should be delivered in about a month. So we are in that process of converting to an electric fleet, or where possible, converting to electric vehicles. And then the other piece is looking at lifetime costs of that. So although an electric vehicle right now might cost more than a typical gas-using vehicle, we're shifting that thought process and working with our budget team, as well as our maintenance and kind of the people who are taking care of these vehicles, and shifting that thought as not just looking at the upfront cost, but looking at what that maintenance cost is over the lifetime. We're finding that electric vehicles have a much longer lifetime. Typically right now, a city vehicle is turned over every 5 years, where, again, we just started purchasing electric vehicles, but we're looking to get closer to 8 or 9 years out of each of those vehicles at minimum. And also just the day-to-day maintenance is much lower and a much lower cost to the city. So taking in that full life cycle cost analysis instead of just the upfront cost is kind of a shift in thinking.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, the vehicles you're referring to, are these like automobiles, pickup trucks, dump trucks, or what kind of vehicles?
So with the electric vehicles, we've started with just sedans right now. So Ford Focus and Chevy Volt are the 2 that we've purchased. They are currently being used for our PLI, so permits, licensing, and inspection, because they drive every day, but they drive only about 30 miles every day around the city of Pittsburgh to do building inspections. So it's a place where the technology was readily available. Those cars are kind of already market ready. They're easy to procure. And then it's also a good case study just because they are heavily used but not high mileage. So they return to the station to charge every night. They're parked all night. So that's where we're starting. We've done some around biodiesel in our heavier duty trucks. With some success. We need to work more in that area, but that's kind of where we're always looking, is to convert the heavy duty trucks as well. But that's kind of market dependent and seeing what technology emerges in that area.
Do you have numbers on the emissions of a regular vehicle as opposed to an electric vehicle, including the coal or whatever powering that electricity? Do you have those numbers?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I do, and I can share them with you. Kind of a general gist and part of our analysis as well. If you're in the city of Pittsburgh, an electric vehicle is cleaner than a gas-using vehicle because Pittsburgh is 65% nuclear, so it's emissions-free. If you tie into a grid or plug into the grid in the larger PJM network, it's about the same emissions. So another thing that we're doing is trying to get renewably generated energy to power our electric vehicles. Just about 2 weeks ago, we had our first 3 EV ARCs installed. And so there's solar panels that have a charging station attached to it. So those about 10 vehicles that we'll be getting in the next month will all be able to charge from solar energy. So that's kind of what we're looking at, is that we do need to not just plug in and then you're just basically displacing those emissions, but make sure that you're powering with clean energy as well.
I have a question. I know it's pretty neat to have electric vehicles. I know they run on batteries. What do they do with the batteries when it's all exhausted? Can they recycle those, or what's the deal with those?
Yeah, so that's where we're working with part of our procurement policy that we're working around, is making sure that when we buy the car, that for the most part, wherever we're buying it, takes the car back and is responsible, or takes the batteries back and is responsible for recycling them, and kind of the proper management of that waste stream. So right now, it is mostly kind of on that other end. We're looking at researching if there's better uses or other ways we can manage that waste stream, again, to get to that zero waste goal, but that's what's happening right now.
Is there any word on natural gas use for the fleet as well?
So we do kind of, with the biodiesel, we do have, I want to say 2 natural gas, again, heavier duty trucks. We're right now still kind of in the data collection phase of that. And the other issue is around infrastructure. So the actual delivery of that gas. There's not kind of the fueling infrastructure within the city of Pittsburgh, which makes it difficult to use as a resource.
Is part of your program attending to larger organizations, private organizations that might have fleets, and then certain manufacturing facilities of various types generate a lot of CO? Is that part of your program, or how do you approach that?
So through the whole climate action plan process, the whole greenhouse gas inventory process, we did incorporate and work a lot with the large institutions in the city of Pittsburgh. And so one of the conversation is working with a lot of those private fleet operators to again convert more to a fossil fuel free fleet. So we're looking like things with the Port Authority buses, they're looking into converting to electric buses. We're working with a lot of the universities who have private shuttles for their students and seeing how we can convert some of those. And again, that's a good place to start because a lot of those people have more of that upfront capital and the ability. They have to purchase new shuttles on a somewhat regular basis, so they have that capital available to make that conversion. Does anybody else have any other questions? If not, I'm going to stop there, I think, so I can make sure that we have time. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. And now we're going to bring up Jason Dailey, who's the Public Works Director for Cranberry Township. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jason Dailey. I'm the Public Works Director for Cranberry. I was really here though to come in and try and get some of you communities to secede to Butler County. That was part of the plan for this. But the the purpose of this presentation is to talk about the nuts and bolts of what a fleet replacement program might look like for your community, big or small. In my previous employment, I was a manager in a very small community out near the airport, Crescent Township. Any of you know where that is? Out near the airport. It was a great community. I really had a chance to see everything from code enforcement to public works, police, the whole gamut there. But while I was there, I was also responsible for recommending fleet purchases. And I think that we had a total of 7 vehicles there, maybe less than that. At the time. So managing a fleet program with 7 vehicles was a lot easier than my next place that I went as a township manager was West Deer Township. I see some of my old board members over there, yes, and another one over there. West Deer Township in the northern part of the county, and it had a much larger fleet and a much larger police department, a lot more equipment, and so the strategy for considering how to replace all of those things had to, it had to be more thoughtful. It had to take a lot more time and effort. And of course, now in Cranberry Township, where I have over 130 pieces of equipment and vehicles, with a 50-person full-time public works department, a 32-person police department, you can imagine what you're responsible for and having to budget and recommend replacements in an environment like that is much different. But I do believe that the principles, though, that go into a 7-vehicle and small community, I still use those principles where I'm at today, and that's really what I'm hoping to share with you all, and hopefully you can take that back and consider how to use that in your community. So recently I was at a conference, public works conference, and the speaker said that how many of you in the room consider your operation to be multiple businesses under your one community name. So for instance, he gave the example, your police department's like a private security firm. Your public works operation is like a construction operation in the summertime, and then it turns into a private landscape company that does winter maintenance in the wintertime. And your code enforcement operation is like a private inspection agency. And when you start to think of your community like that as multiple businesses, you do start to and then you start thinking about how your fleet is underneath all of those different businesses. You start to have a different perspective, right? So that private landscape company, they have a singular focus, right? When they're looking to, use their equipment for both landscaping and winter maintenance, they have, a very limited focus as to what they can focus on. They're looking at, what is the best way for them to maximize their salt usage with the spreader that they use in the wintertime, but also the vehicles that they select. So, the size of those vehicles go into their, thought, process, and then how that's going to be used in the summertime. So we all think that way, in our communities as well. And sometimes, we allow our department heads or, perhaps a committee, to help, make those recommendations and do the research on that. And, we don't oftentimes think of it globally with our community, as one business with all these, little businesses involved. So after when he was done talking about that, it really got me thinking that how you engage your community and how you engage your various departments really makes a difference in how your fleet gets managed. I saw this slide recently that the cost of owning a vehicle. This is put out by AAA this year, and they say that the average cost, and this is just a privately owned vehicle, is $9,100 a year. The average cost of a vehicle ownership, $9,100 a year. That's a lot of money when you think of and this wasn't necessarily including car payments. This was maintenance. This was fuel. This was some of the other items that they include here. Insurance. The depreciation on that vehicle. Think of how many vehicles that you have in your community. This is again privately owned vehicles here, but think about $9,100 per vehicle. How does that relate to your community? Is that something that starts to add up real quick in your head, that even if you have those 7 vehicles like I did in Crescent Township, I am up to thinking that way, $70,000 a year in vehicle maintenance. That was a lot for a small community like that to have to consider. Now we all can probably relate to this with our own vehicles that we have, where as a vehicle ages, it starts to experience it starts to break down, right? The older that a vehicle gets, the more wear and tear you get. Gas fuel economy starts to degrade on you. It starts to need things here and there, and this is probably a graph that we can all pretty well relate to pretty easily with our own vehicles. And how can you visualize this applying to the fleet that you have at your community? Do you see certain departments that their curve is much higher? Do they invest more in repair and maintenance than they necessarily need to. And those are the kind of things that we're going to talk about in the next few slides here. So some of the impacts, of an older fleet on your community, these are some of the things that you might not think about all the time, but when you do start to break these down and take them piece by piece, you do start to put this bigger picture together that maybe we need to do a better job at managing our overall fleet program. Some of the things that we see, repair and maintenance costs increase over time, like we just saw in that previous chart. That's a given. But sometimes there's that time whenever those vehicles have to come out of service for repair, right? So, a codes officer is out, he would be relying on his vehicle to go and make those inspections. Now that vehicle is no longer available because it's in the shop, right? There's a cost to that for us. Fuel efficiency, we talked about that. That is, vehicle ages. That fuel efficiency decreases over time, and that really hits our bottom line budget, right? We might not see that because we're constantly, just adding that line as a fuel item in our budgets, but that certainly affects our bottom line. Vehicle safety options. How many of you in here own a newer car? Yeah, me too. And one of the things I'm always surprised about when I get into my car, if I go to make a lane change, I start to get bells, I start to get lights that go off on the mirrors now. Those things are kind of automatic in our newer cars. In your municipal cars, how many of your municipal cars, have those same features? Probably very few of them, right? And these are almost standard safety features in our vehicles. A story that I have from Cranberry was, one of our operators for our sewer and water operation was in an accident. He had went to make a lane change and side-swiped the vehicle, and we were asking him, what was the cause of that? We did our investigation on it, and he said, well, you were calling me. I reached over to pick up my phone to answer that, and I swiped that vehicle beside us, and it got me thinking, why are we not putting Bluetooth in our municipal vehicles? What was when I went back to research why we didn't have Bluetooth in there, we actually had to pay extra for that vehicle not to have Bluetooth in it. I mean, that was, and it was just because we did not spec those when we were replacing our vehicles. And, we shouldn't have been doing that. It was something very simple, and it would have cost us less to do that. But there's so many more safety features. A backup camera. When you go to back up your vehicle now, right, comes right up on your dashboard, and you see that the #1 accident in the country is backing up, right? That's the #1 insurance claim for that. But it's such a simple feature. It usually, is not very costly, to have added. But we don't think about that, whenever we are replacing our municipal vehicles. Even our larger trucks have those options to have cameras installed in them to help our operators back up. An additional impact, aside from the safety of an older fleet, is also, those emergency replacements. For those of you that have been on council or been in management for a while, you've probably had that department head. I know I was one of them, that I would go to my boss and say, hey, we didn't plan this replacement, but we have to replace it now. It's in the middle of the year, budget's already set. Now my administration is scrambling to try to find funds to replace that vehicle, and that is not a good practice. That is, a well-planned strategy should be that, you are not waiting for those knee-jerk replacements that are needed, but rather you're planning them out. And then the last thing, the impact of an aging, fleet is that image. The image that your vehicles, every one of your residents, sees your vehicles out there. They are probably one of the first things that people see whenever they think of your community because of your logo being on the door. And is your municipal vehicle all banged up? Is it all dented? Is it ever washed? Does it ever see a scrub brush? But those are the kind of things that people correlate to your community when they're thinking of what kind of community do I live in here. And so the image of that, and that's a very easy thing to improve upon, but that image also affects your employees. How good it feels when you buy your new car and you're sitting in that car with that new car smell and learning all those new car gadgets that are that you're working on, your employees feel the same way. When you buy that new car, and they get to learn that vehicle, that is an employee morale booster, for them. So all of this isn't just to talk about our old fleets and things like that, but rather to start talking about what can we do about that, right? Even as lay people who might not be fleet managers or have fleet replacement experience, what can we do as lay people to put together a plan that would be efficient for our community and try to put that roadmap out there so that we're not needing to make those knee-jerk reactions. These are some key indicators that are available to all of us, from our community, just by walking around our garage and walking around the shop. Some of those things include the age of the vehicle, the miles or the hours, that are on your vehicles and pieces of equipment, the type and use. This is, is it a police car that's involved in pursuit? Is it, just used for court time? Is this a public works vehicle that has multiple uses throughout the year? Those are all, things to, that you can collect on your own to start putting your plan together. Inspection and maintenance logs. How much money are you dumping into these vehicles? What is the actual cost for you to maintain and to run those vehicles throughout the year? Fuel usage, whether you have your own fueling station or if you fuel within at a local station within your community, those logs are available to you, right, to try to find out what the fuel economy is for your fleet. And then the overall cost, the parts, the labor that goes into maintaining that vehicle, whether that's with your in-house mechanics or if you have to send that out to a shop, trying to keep all that data together per vehicle and then assembling that to kind of look at your overall fleet costs is something that we can all do as lay people, not having a degree in fleet management. However, whenever you do want to start taking it to the next level, and once you start gathering up some of this data, Jim really likes the look of these. He thought these were very typical government-looking documents here. APWA was a great resource for me whenever I first started to look at fleet in a little more detail, and they had. He likes the color of this one a lot. This right here, that one takes the cake. But these publications really were able to show, based on a military model, whenever the military looked at this, they looked at a point system for every piece of equipment and for every segment of their operation. So, for instance, they started to look at administrative vehicles, and they would say, a sedan has, the ideal lifespan for a sedan is so many years at so many miles with so much money charged against it, with so much reliability factored into it, and they assigned a point system to every one of those categories. And whenever a vehicle reached a certain point system, it was eligible for replacement. And what that did was that that allowed for there to be some predictability within your fleet. So you didn't have folks like me coming to their manager saying, I need this replaced right away. Now there was a more objective approach that you could take in order to get your vehicle replaced. These are two great documents. APWA.net is where these can be found, relatively inexpensive. I think they're $5 or $6 to get these, but they have some great information. And again, this is where it got started, for me. So some of the elements that I found within these publications, though, was that I really needed to have a policy. Whenever I was at these communities, I needed to have some kind of a document that I could point to that I would be able to take to my department heads and to my employees and say, this is how we're going to manage our fleet, within this community. We are going to, we're going to try to avoid this knee-jerk approach towards fleet replacement and budget, catastrophe, and we're going to try to set some expectations up for how this is going to be done. And so it was pushed out to all departments. And it outlined those parameters, like I said, about what type of vehicle gets replaced based on what parameters. It allowed for multi-year budgeting and also allowed for exceptions. There's always got to be room for exceptions. A great example is that my township manager now, everybody know Jerry Andre. If you don't, you should. He's a great guy. His vehicle, he is a always driving around the township. On the weekends, he's inspecting the parks. He's at meetings all the time. His vehicle for a standard administrative employee has a lot more miles on it than the average, manager, might have on it. So his vehicle gets replaced a lot sooner than maybe, like a code enforcement officer's might, because of the amount of miles that he puts on his vehicle. But whenever I started to look at the standards within these publications, I found out that not all of these standards were the same, and that every community was different, and every community had the ability to adjust those standards. So if you look on this particular slide here, there was a light duty dump truck that's listed on here. You can see one of the parameters shows that the ideal replacement schedule for that is 7 years and 60,000 miles. And if you look down at the next one, 7 years and 80,000 miles. And then at the one below, 7 years and 150,000 miles. So those are three different examples of policies that three different organizations have for light duty truck replacements. So while the parameters are set out in here as what's ideal for those pieces of equipment, again, they can always be adjusted to what fits your community and what's going to work for your budget. But having that plan is better than not having a plan at all, because then you jam yourself up at some point. To gather that vehicle information, these forms like this are available to us, and someone who has a great plan that's online is Mount Lebanon, right from our own county here. They have a great document for it. I'm not sure if it's been updated lately, but it has their plan on there from 2013 through 2017, and a lot of this information here is I took some screenshots from their particular plan because it was available. But these are outlined how they grab that data from each vehicle in order to start assembling their overall replacement plan. But a vehicle like this grabs the age, it grabs the use, the type, if there's anything wrong with that vehicle, how much is spent on it, what the current purchase price was, whenever you're ready to start replacing, what the current price of that vehicle might be. And that gives you some information that really becomes helpful whenever you start putting your entire plan together for your community. So I provided some examples here because some of this might sound a little bit Greek up to this point. So I'm going to go through two examples here of what the typical exercise might be whenever you start looking at your fleets back at home. So this example here is a public works vehicle, an F550, 2012. It's 6 years old, has 45,000 miles on it. It's used in the wintertime, tailgate spreader, 9-foot plow in the winter for operations. In the summertime, it's used for construction. And overall, it's had $4,000 in repair costs over its life. So whenever you start looking at this, maybe your replacement plan, like one of those ones that we just looked at, shows that no, this vehicle is not eligible for replacement until it's 7 year, reaches that 7-year mark. And it also needs to have 60,000 miles on it. Oftentimes you want to be interviewing the drivers and certainly talking with the departments to find out, is there something else going on with this vehicle? Is there something wrong with the emissions filters and things like that? But relatively, that's a low cost right now that vehicle is experiencing for repair and maintenance costs. So based on the parameters that you set up, this vehicle would not be eligible for replacement. Second example is with a police pursuit sedan. Now, police vehicles fall into their own category. That's, again, when we start talking about all those different business models that we have in our communities, the police is certainly a special case, right? Their vehicles, in this example, we'll just walk through this again. It's a 2014, so it's only 4 years old, has 50,000 miles on it. It is a pursuit vehicle. Like most police vehicles, it has multiple drivers, which is certainly an impact to the condition of that vehicle. Has high idle time. We all know our police like to idle our vehicles. And it has $5,000 in repair costs up to this point. So based on the parameters that we look at, hope that green comes over, it has 3 years, 3 years is the parameter, so it meets the time frame that would say when a police vehicle should be replaced. A typical replacement plan for police vehicles is 36,000 miles. I've seen it as low as 30,000 miles for police vehicles. So every 3 years, every 36,000 miles. So just based on two real quick parameters, this vehicle would meet the replacement consideration. lots of things go into replacement, and some of it can oftentimes have to do with what the resale of a vehicle looks like as well for something like this. A lot of cab companies like police vehicles, that kind of thing, you can work some of the prices based on that, but just based on that would be eligible for replacement. So, after you do those individual assessments and you're able to start gathering up that data, like on that evaluation form, this was a snapshot of a community here that, after they went through all of their departments and started to gather all their vehicle lists, this is an example of maybe what your fleet might look like, and the useful life. And now you can start really digging in and start to develop what a better replacement plan might look like over multiple years. Maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years, but this is an example. If you were to replace every vehicle in this plan, you can see $9,500,000 if you were going to replace every vehicle for this community right now. Of course, none of us have that kind of money, so again, staging this out and developing that that plan. This is what the first year of that replacement plan looked like. For this community, where they started to look at, they listed by the year, what department this had, what the replacement cost was, and now this starts to become a little more workable, right? So you're not necessarily being hit with that $9.5 million total replacement, but rather looking at it over a much shorter time. This community, again, Mount Lebanon's plan showed a 4-year replacement plan. So that means that every vehicle in that fleet would have been recognized for replacement based on that plan. But some of those vehicles certainly got stretched out a little bit further, like public works vehicles. They can sometimes have a 20-year life expectancy on them, based on their use. So that's just about everything that I had. I just want to give you guys a quick recap on what a replacement plan looks like, and anyone has any questions. Okay, so the question is about owning a vehicle versus allowing an employee to use their own personal vehicle for city business. Sure, that's a pretty easy comparison to do, especially based on, I know when, for example, when I came up here, for this, example, I brought my own vehicle up here, I could turn in a 54.5 cent reimbursement per mile, based on this, the IRS, rates for that. It would probably come out to $30 or something like that to, for my time coming up here. That would be a pretty easy evaluation to do, and I think that it should be done, especially if you have employees that don't really do a whole lot of travel, and the cost of that vehicle, again, per year, $9,122 based on AAA. It would be a good evaluation, to do. You do have to wonder, along those lines too, if employees were to take Uber across town or something like that. In those examples, also consider something like that. Yeah. Yes.
2 points I'd like to address. When you use your own vehicle, I'll tell you right now, you have to notify your insurance company that you are using that for a business purpose. Yep. Because if you're involved in an accident, you're going into a holy shitstorm.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And my second, do you guys have training for your people that drive public works vehicles? I'm not saying that our crew now, but I can cite a perfect example. When I do refrigeration, air conditioning, and when UDF was in business, their main hub was in Greentree. There were some of them guys that would take them trucks out to every pothole they could and bring them back with snap springs. The maintenance cost basically was gobbling up UDF because some guys didn't care. I'm not saying everybody, but you do get some. It's not my vehicle. Why am I worried about it?
Sure. Yeah.
So you do a training on stuff like that and how to teach. Some people you got to teach to respect the vehicle because it does drive up cost.
Sure. Yeah. So the something with that is with how we've tried to take another approach with how we manage things like that is every one of our trucks at Cranberry right now has GPS on it. And that gives you a lot of information. Fuel economy is certainly one thing, idle time is another, but erratic driving, while there's not necessarily a something to give me an alert that says someone's driving erratically, there is speed alerts, and there's things like being able to look at who is driving what vehicle when. And but to answer your other question, yes, we do provide training for driving. We do that for our police officers as well, defensive driving course. We actually brought in a trainer who came to the municipality, set up an obstacle course, in our back parking lot. And we had cones set up, the whole works, and they ran through drills, for the police department, and then for our public works operation, they did drive-alongs, and to help newer drivers and even some seasoned drivers. Yep, I mean, just to give them some little tips and tricks.
Thanks. I want to make a comment. You guys got a beautiful building out there. I've been out there a few times.
Well, thank you. Yes. Yes.
I have a question about the maintenance, in-house maintenance, or you send it out, and what's their cost benefit, either one?
Sure. So we use both. We have 3 full-time mechanics, and that is, we.
Can I have one?
Yeah. And we're outsourcing them. No. But no. So we do everything pretty much except replace engines. With that. So, part of the theory behind, some of the ideas with this replacement plan is, a police vehicle, when you think about it, those miles, when you think about 3 years, 36,000 miles, that's pretty, close to the warranty time. So if you can keep vehicles in their warranty, it's the dealership's responsibility, at that point to address that too. So that's one way to kind of help with that. But we do it in-house, and we've looked at that before, and there's certainly services out there locally back in Pittsburgh. We've looked at 2 even recently we always look at that cost benefit. Is it starting to get more reasonable for us to outsource that or have them even come in? There's some services that will even come in and work on your vehicles at your location. They'll provide the parts, the service, the labor, all of that. They just won't be your employee.
Do you have a union shop there?
2 unions in Public Works.
Okay.
Yep.
And are your mechanics union?
They are. Yep. And the Teamsters. Mr. Borchak, I'll be right back.
This question actually goes out to all 3. As I'm sitting listening to, and thank you for all your points. As I'm sitting listening to all 3 of you, my maintenance and my decision on purchase and replace vehicles is very traditional and similar to yours. What are the repair costs? What is the standard? How are my tough drivers? Is there any statistical evidence for the other 2 folks of when this becomes more inefficient in the environment that I can use as a tool in my toolbox when I'm making these purchase, lease, replace decisions?
Anything, Sarah?
So one of the things that we look at, have just started looking at, is the social cost of carbon. And so we have just recently started doing some research into how we put a monetary value to carbon or just environmental impacts as a whole. So we're looking at things like management of our green spaces, air quality, fleet, kind of that transition away from fossil fuels. We haven't gotten to the point where we're really using it in the procurement kind of decision-making process yet, but we're trying to get to that point. And a lot of that research is out there. We use all kind of peer-reviewed articles and different platforms that have those values already calculated from a scientific standpoint, and then we're just looking at how we can better incorporate that. And then the other piece is healthcare costs. We have a lot of data as far as the healthcare cost in the city of Pittsburgh as it relates to emissions into air pollution, especially getting back to that asthma rate. So taking into effect some of those things when we're making decisions.
I mean,
as well.
I get that, but kind of winding back a little bit. All this stuff is really great, and believe me, I have no degree in what you do, and I admire very much what you do. When I am approaching my council, I'm the borough manager of Bellevue, I've got about a minute and a half to justify whether I'm going to buy that vehicle. And all the factors come in. I would love to say, and by the way, from an emission standpoint, we are to the point in this vehicle that it is dangerous or that it grades out at this. Just a 10-second tool to put in that. So to take all that data, you're taking it and saying, okay, this is our effect on the environment. I'm saying, how do I contribute to improve that? And the answer is, do I make this a factor in getting rid of my vehicle in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? So I would love to have that data, but it's kind of backwards to what you're doing. You see what I'm saying? Going back and saying, when do I say the effect on the environment is something, is something important in the evaluation of this vehicle. And I will tell you, I don't think we're saying anything about that right now. We're evaluating solely on a mechanical basis.
And I think outside of our office, we're because we're the Sustainability and Resilience office, I think the City of Pittsburgh is very much in the same place. The difference is a lot of the shift in thinking at that leadership level. So we've gotten to the point where Mayor Peduto and a lot of the members of council are starting to think that way. So I think that's helping, that it's not necessarily always us having to introduce the idea and make the case, but more that they are already in that mindset.
And I'll take, I'm not close to a mic, I'll grab this. So we work with a number of, I mentioned at the beginning that Sustainable Pittsburgh works with a number of businesses. And I think you just laid out a great webinar that we should be doing, because our partners at Pitt Ohio Trucking is one of our best partners. They've done some of the best work on that transition and how they're considering that transition. And FedEx has also been very aggressive in that transition and figuring out what it means as a cost modeling. So we'll bring together a webinar and work with LGA to produce a webinar on exactly that, and see if we can't get, with your help, maybe get a little closer to how that looks. That's great.
Just a question. Does your public works department drivers require a CDL license?
Obviously that's based on the size of the vehicle that they would be required to operate. For our streets division, it is a requirement of employment, that it be attained within 6 months and that it be a condition of employment. So if the operator would fall into some reason that they would have to lose that CDL, that could affect their employment with us. Yep. Anything else? Great, thank you.
Okay.